Hi, welcome everybody. Thank you all for joining this webinar today. My name is Eric Vargas. I'm part of the sales and marketing team here at FollowUp Power. In just a few minutes, we're going to be flipping it over to CEO of Best Roofing, Gregg Wallick, and we're going to discuss how he built his sales machine here in South Florida at Best Roofing. Just want to give a couple more minutes to those who are still logging on and joining, but we're going to get started here in just a few minutes. Alrighty, now that I've seen that everybody has joined, that has signed up, want to do a quick bio about Gregg and his life. So as you can see here, he went to the University of Miami. He was actually the captain of the football team there, led that team to a lot of victories, and he was second generation roofing contractor since 1978. You can see that's a picture of Gregg with his great hair, his father, and his kids in front of a Best Roofing truck. He was a former director of the NRCA. He was a CEO and president of General Roofing Services until 2001. And from there, he started Best Roofing in South Florida and has grown the company to $50 million in the Tri-County area, and they're still growing, crushing their numbers. And he's also the chairman of the board of trustees for Everglades University and Kaiser University. So I'd like to welcome Gregg Wallick and flip it over to him. He's going to be discussing how he has built a successful sales organization in Best Roofing. Gregg?
Couple clarifications just so that you know and understand how I think. I believe that our businesses are either growing or they're shrinking. There's just no standing still. You're either taking market share or losing market share. You're either getting traction or losing traction. So that's just how I think. Our agenda for today is I'm a real fundamentalist. I go back to my days of playing ball, and I think blocking and tackling is the key to every successful organization, making sure that you've got the fundamentals in place. So what I want to talk about today is I want to talk about defining the sales process, hiring the right people, providing leadership, and then holding your team accountable. First thing is, let's talk about the sales process. And I ask every contractor, and I ask myself, are we transaction focused? And if you're transaction focused, you're most likely doing a lot of bidding, and if you're just bidding, you're probably doing some begging also. The other side of the equation is, am I relationship focused? And if you're relationship focused, you're in a position to do some negotiating. Whether you're transaction focused, which is relatively easy because all you have to do is find something that needs a bid and then throw a number at it. And most of the time, the decisions are made based on a number. And I'm not saying that that's a bad business to be in. As a matter of fact, there was a chapter of my career where I was a real transaction focused person in the school board business and, public bid openings. And if you're going to be in that transaction focused business, you just have to be very efficient, and you have to be a low cost producer and understand really how to find the most advantageous solution. So that you can get a little bit of margin in there. Transaction focused, bidding focused usually has a tendency to be a little bit lower margin. But it's not like you have to go out and find the work finds you. So you don't really, most transaction focused companies don't have much marketing expenses going on. If you are relationship focused, it takes time, again, because relationships don't happen overnight. So there's two kinds of models, either being transaction focused or relationship focused. And then the next thing is, how many hats do your people wear? Do your salespeople estimate? Do your estimators sell? Uh, do my sales and estimators project manage? There's just a lot of disciplines. Who does the takeoff? And that needs to be defined. So, I always challenge people to say, define your sales process. Where does the lead come from? How do we qualify the lead? Who performs the takeoff? Who does the estimate? Who presents the proposal? Who follows up? Who project manages the job? Who interfaces with the client once the job's going on? So, these are all things that need to be defined for you to have an effective sales organization. Second component I want to talk about today is hiring the right people. I've learned over my career that it's easier to teach roofing than it is how to behave. So, I like to hire character and train the roofing. I'm worried less about how much experience you have and worried more about who you are. Bobby Bowden, greatest coach in college football, winningest coach in college football. I saw him on TV a year or two ago. He was being interviewed by some commentators, and they asked him, they said, Bobby, what was the secret to your success? I mean, you're the winningest coach in college football. How did you do it? And he kind of chuckled like Bobby does, in that old Southern way. And he says, you know what? It's 80% recruiting. I was a great recruiter. I got the right players on the field, and it's about 20% good coaching and good planning. And that's what I would say to every one of us is we got to put the right people on the field. We got to have the right players, representing us out there. And you really define your success by who you hire to a certain extent. I believe that there's two kinds of salespeople. I believe that there's hunters, and I believe there's farmers. And I'm not saying that any one is right. I think it just depends on what kind of business you have. If you're a hunter is somebody who's probably going to go out and find you new business, where a farmer is somebody that's going to just maintain your existing clients and help them grow. The characteristics of a hunter is that, they're really good at bagging big jobs. They take charge, they're aggressive, they're competitive, they have a really entrepreneurial, spirit about them. They're very individual, they're very hungry. A lot of times they're loners, a lot of times they're disruptive too. They can be very disruptive in your organization. Farmers, they're the kind of people that really cultivate a relationship. They kind of let things develop. They always ask, the client, so what do you think? They're collaborative. They're team players. They're softer. They're nurturing a relationship. They're like watering the plant and letting it grow. Who do you need? In my business, I've got both. I've got hunters and I got farmers. Especially in my service department, we have a really big service department here, and there's no selling going on. The sale took place the first time we did the project. Now what we're doing is we're just maintaining the relationship, and I need a farmer type mentality for that. Somebody who just really nurtures the relationship. But I need new business coming in, and I need new clients. So I got a couple of hunters and a handful of farmers on my sales team. Excuse me. I think it's really important to have a written job description. And you should have a written job description for every position within your company. For sales, you really need to define what markets you're going to go after and who you want your salespeople to pursue. You want to make sure you're really defining the responsibilities and your expectations, and making sure that the expectations are perfectly clear. And what kind of competencies, what kind of skills should that person have who's representing you? All of my position descriptions, job descriptions, are formatted like this. You got a statement or objective of what's expected. You want to make sure that you clearly define the responsibilities. You want to talk about the reporting structure. Who do they report to? What kind of skills and experience do you want them to have? And I really believe it's important to get the salary ranges and everything spelled out right up front. Nothing can ruin a good relationship faster than a dispute over money. I believe that compensation drives behavior. I'm not saying that I have any one particular compensation program that I think is best. I think a lot of that depends on the culture of your company and just how you go to market. There are certain companies that are really successful with just commission only. Now, I can tell you this, when you have a commission only salesperson, they're going to be very, very loyal to themselves and to their clients. And they're not going to be as loyal to you because they only get paid when they sell. There's salary plus commission, which is, not a bad situation for certain kinds of cultures and companies. Straight salary would be something that you would probably do with somebody who is more on the farmer side, where they're servicing existing clients, or where you're not bringing in new business, or when you're working on something that has a really long selling cycle. Salary plus a bonus is also something where you're going to have people that are going to probably be a little bit more loyal to the company because they don't have to sweat whether they get a commission or not to feed their families. So I believe that the compensation program that you should use with your organization is going to depend on the culture of your company and just how you go to market. I'm not advocating any one particular one. I'm saying it depends. So how do you find people? It's a tough market out there right now, pretty much across the board in everything. Sometimes you target your competition. I find my best people come from my existing staff. They always know who other people that might be out there. So I'm a real believer in my existing staff, and I offer a bounty for anybody who gives us a referral. You can always be networking and finding people out there. Social media is a good way also to stay connected. LinkedIn is an awesome source for finding people. Traditional media, I think that's pretty much over. Nobody puts ads in the newspaper or anything like that anymore. Networking and associations is really a good way to find people. And you know what? You can use a headhunter. I haven't had tremendous success with headhunters. I could find basically the same resumes, on Monster or a lot of these other, web-based kind of resources to help you find people. So I'm not a real advocate of headhunters. I've used them in the past. I kind of feel to a certain extent they just broker resumes. And then they get a big fee for it. I'm a real big believer in doing behavior assessments, especially knowing that 50% of all forecasted sales are lost due to sales force turnover. Sales force turnover is usually where the greatest turnover is in most organizations. I'm really lucky right now. I've got a great sales team. I've got 10 salespeople on our sales team. Plus 5 estimators, so that gives us about 15 people, and it's been really stable. But what we did was we got tremendously serious about hiring the right people and making sure that we had a good compensation program in place. These personality assessment tools, they help you understand just how somebody's wired, what kind of work style they have. It identifies their talents and behaviors, their ideal work environment, the keys to motivating them and managing them, and it also helps identifying their areas for improvement, or better said, where their weaknesses are. Now, I don't believe that we're in the behavior modification business. I'm personally in the roofing business. So I'm not looking to change and modify behaviors. I'm looking to put people in positions where they can be successful. And so just knowing what somebody's not good at says, don't put them there. Don't try to make them into something that they're not. Try to put them in a position that they can be successful at. Kind of another way to maybe look at it would be, don't think you can take somebody who's a good offensive lineman and put them out as a wide receiver and that they're going to catch a lot of balls. They're just not wired for that. They're not built for that. But they're great offensive linemen. So, put people in positions where they can be successful is what I think. The personality assessment tool that I really have have learned to use is the DISC profile assessment tool. And what it does is it identifies your strengths, weaknesses, and just how you think. Most everybody is either outgoing or they are reserved. They're either people-oriented or they're task-oriented. And what happens is this test allows you to measure somebody's, there's 4 basic personality profiles. There's the dominance, the influencer, the compliance, or the steady, or somewhere in between. Everybody falls somewhere in between, and they'll have a tendency to be a certain way. I'm going to share with you my personality profile. You take it, it's a multiple choice test. It's taken online. It really shouldn't take more than 15 minutes when you do it. And here's what my test came out. Again, I told you there's 4 primary personality types. There's the dominance, the influencing, the steadiness, and the compliance. And the line right here is, this line right here in the center is going to define, if that is a really strong characteristic. Now, I have a tendency to fall into the dominance. I'm driving, ambitious, pioneering, gives you all these adjectives. I'm also a good influencer. I'm not the steadiest person. I don't have quite the patience, and I'm not quite as compliant as some people, including my wife, would like me to be. But this is just who I am. The test always, also, you can see here, I took this back in 2008. I've taken the test a handful of times since then, and you know what? It comes out basically the same way every time. But, this is called the wheel, the success wheel, and what this says is that my natural, personality is that I'm a conductor, persuader. My adaptive is that I'm really a conductor. Under pressure, I'm gonna lean towards the dominant personality characteristic that I have. But I'm a real believer. Like, for me, if you're not a conductor, a persuader, or promoter, I don't think you belong in sales. If you're in business development, I'm looking for, a promoter, a relator. If I'm hiring an estimator, I'm looking for an analyzer. If I'm hiring somebody who's going to work in the field, I'm looking for somebody who's going to be a coordinator or a supporter. So, and what I found is I tested my best people, found out where they were, and then when I'm getting ready to hire somebody, I want to make sure that I test and that they're wired to do the job that I'm asking them to do. Now, is this absolutely positively, the way that could somebody not be successful if they weren't wired like that? No, there's exceptions out there, but you're going to have a tendency that, if somebody's wired to do a particular job, they're going to be better at it than people who aren't. So I'm a real believer in this. I think, I do this for everybody. I even did it to my wife before we got married. And I showed her mine. That was the other thing too. I said, look, I'm like this. I want you to know this going in, and I'm probably not going to change. So, and I'd like to know a little bit about how you are. And so, I'm not going to try to change you because, it just works better like that. I think you need to have a good prepared list of questions before you, start interviewing somebody. It's always best to ask them, what's the perfect role for you? Who was your best boss and why? And if you're going to be the boss, you want to find out, what they're expecting from you and how you can be effective with them. How do you organize your priorities? Kind of what tools do you use? Do you use Google? You use Outlook? What do you use to organize yourself? Do you use a yellow pad? This is a good question I always ask. Who's been the most influential person in your life and why? I had somebody the other day that had been referred by somebody else, and I asked them this question: who was the most influential person in your life? And they told me somebody that I knew, and I'm sitting here thinking, holy mackerel. if that's the most influential person in your life, I'm not sure if I want you working with me. But, a lot of times you'll hear things like, it was my father or it was my mother. And then you ask the question, why? You know, and you'll learn a lot about somebody. And then here's a question I always ask. What's your greatest skill, asset that you'd be bringing into the organization? And here's something else too. Past performance predicts future performance. Another couple of questions I ask is, what's the most significant personal accomplishment that you've had? And then what's the most significant professional accomplishment that you've had? Because again, if past performance predicts future performance, I want to know, what's your most significant thing that you've ever accomplished? If, graduating from high school is, well, you probably know that that's not going to be somebody that's going to work in an executive type position for you. Not always. I'm not saying that you have to have a college degree or anything like that, but, again, past performance predicts future performance. Okay, now here's where a lot of it comes down to just you. Are you a supervisor or are you a leader? Is this you? Are you somebody who's kind of like this, who's a little bit pompous, or are you somebody like this who, gets down and on the same level as the players and who's committed to teamwork and winning championships? Supervisors, they kind of ask questions or they answer questions when they're asked, and a leader will ask questions to help identify what's going on in the team and to better understand what's going on. A supervisor will describe excellence to a team, but a real leader, he's going to model it by working with a team. A supervisor is going to, he's only going to provide coaching when he's forced to, but a leader is going to provide coaching on an ongoing activity, and he's always going to be working with you to become better. Supervisors have a tendency to just focus on deficiencies, where leaders are going to celebrate accomplishments, and it could be just a really simple accomplishment, but people always respond better to being caught doing things right instead of caught doing things wrong. Supervisors have a tendency to just only give feedback during evaluations, and some companies only give evaluations or reviews once a year. I found that, in my companies, I've always done evaluations and reviews once a quarter. And that's a formalized time where we sit down and we have an adult conversation. And leaders provide consistent, constant, timely feedback. And that's how you're going to build winning teams, by working as a leader versus as a supervisor. Here's something that I learned that, a while ago, and this was like a huge aha moment for me. It's a sales statistic, and this is common knowledge. You can look this up on the internet. 48% of salespeople submit a proposal and never follow up with a prospect. 48%. 25% follow up a second time and then they stop. 12% of all salespeople make 3 contacts and then they give up. Only 10% of salespeople make more than 3% or 3 contacts with the buyer. Okay, now here we go. 2% of all sales are made on the first contact, unless you're in just one of those smaller transaction-focused situations where it's a one-call close. But most of your bigger type projects are never closed on the first contact. 3% of sales are made on the second contact, 5% on the third, 10% of sales are made on the fourth contact. Now, a contact could be a phone call, it could be an email, it could be a presentation, so let me just qualify what a contact means. But 80% of all sales are made on the 5th to 12th contact. Let me tell you what, when I learned that, that was like an awakening, an aha moment for me. And I said, holy cow, all I got to do is be the guy who hangs in there and makes the most follow-up phone calls. And I had a situation on Doral Country Club. Doral Country Club, it's an icon of a property down here in South Florida. It's now the Trump International Doral Country Club. Our president purchased it. But I had the privilege of putting all the roofs on out there Um, a couple of years ago, the entire place got the roof replaced, and that selling cycle took me 3 years. And when I got the contract, I asked the construction manager who was working on that job, he's a guy named Ed Nystrom. I said, "Hey Ed, and this is after I got the contract, we were working, and I said, how come you picked me? Why'd you pick me to do this job?" And he says, "You know what, Greg?" He said, "You were the only guy that hung in there with me." He says, "What ended up happening, to be honest with you, is after about a year, you were the only person I was talking to. It was just a matter of me getting the money and helping the owners, select the tile color and stuff like this and get all our design work. But, you were the one who stuck with me through the whole thing. And I just kind of like went with you because you were the last man standing. And in addition to the fact, you just always kind of followed up with me when you said you were going to be. And that was something that I always do. I always ask, when's the most appropriate time for me to follow up with you? So, and I'm a real big believer in pre-qualifying. Making sure that we have a 7-step process of pre-qualifying. Whether we want to work with somebody, the first thing we do is we do relate and connect. Then we have what we call the rules of engagement. I'm not going to go into these. This is something that the people at FollowUp, have taught us. Then we talk about, what's the problem? We want to find out, why are we even talking? Why are you talking to us about purchasing a roof? And then, we always want to do the money step. What kind of budget do you have? Do you have funding available? Is this going to take financing? But you got to get the money step on the table. And then the next is, what's the decision process? A question that we always ask, we train our people to ask is, who besides you is part of this decision-making process? Sometimes it's an individual, sometimes it's a community. And then after we've got those 5 items, relate and connect, rules of engagement, what's the problem, what kind of money do you have, what kind of decision process, then we present. Because what we want to do is we want to present to the problem, to the decision maker in a way that's going to give us the most chance of winning that. And then the last thing is following up. I mean, if 80% of all sales are made on the 5th to 12th call, you just want to make sure you're the guy who's making that 5th to 12th call. How do you hold your team accountable? I'm a real believer that if you ask a salesperson how you doing, he's always going to tell you that he's doing great. And self-evaluations are a terrible indicator of performance. People can lie about numbers, but numbers can't lie about people. You have to have facts. You got to have numbers that you can measure somebody by. And I'm a real believer that if you manage the behaviors, the results take care of themselves. Too many sales organizations just say, "What did you close?" And there's not a lot of attention paid, to what's happening, along the way and what those behaviors are. Again, I'm a real fundamentalist. I believe in blocking and tackling, and what gets measured gets done. You want to make sure that every lead that comes into your organization gets parked with somebody and it gets handled right. Who does the surveys on the project? When are the meetings? Pricing and estimating, who's doing that? When's that getting done? Proposals, when was that sent out? Calls and emails. When are contracts secured? These are all things that you want to measure, because if you're measuring these activities, everything else is going to take care of itself. And you usually have to have a system that will do this for you. And the things that I believe that a system must have is, monitoring when's your next follow-up. You can't remember that. You got to have a system in place that tugs on you and says it's time to make a call, or time to send an email, or time to send a text. That's another thing. When I ask somebody when's the most appropriate time for me to follow up with you, I'm always going to ask you, and what's the most appropriate way for me to follow up with you? You want me to call you, email you, text you, Pony Express? I mean, how do you like to communicate? Your system needs to be able to help you set priorities. Needs to coordinate work activities. I'm a real believer in goal setting. If you set goals, you'll have a tendency to achieve goals. If you don't set goals, you're probably going to underachieve what you were capable of. Um, I think you got to measure your communications. How many emails, how many phone calls were made, and if you know what your activities are, you can forecast what the future is going to be based on previous activities. So here's the $1 million question. What are you using to hold your team accountable? I use the FollowUp program. Eric, if you could kind of help me with this, we're going to go into. You got my FollowUp program. We're going to try to bring up my. Okay, here we go. This is the FollowUp program that we use here at Best Roofing, and this is Eric. Can they see my mouse going? Is that working? Yeah. Okay. We're looking at the home page. When you log in, and everybody has a login, you go directly to the home page. Now, this is our company overview. If we were to scroll down here, we can do each individual. So the company overview is a roll-up of all the activities. So if we look here, my pipeline, I have $170 million worth of bids on the street. That's 1,334 proposals, bids that we have put on the street that a decision has not been made yet with. Now, pipeline management is one of the most critical things that we as leaders need to pay attention to. And I believe that pipeline management starts with knowing when a decision is going to be made. So when you ask a client, when you submit a proposal to them, and you should probably know this before you submit a proposal to them, is, when do you anticipate having this work done? Sometimes people are saying, look, I want to get it done like right away. Well, we would call that a hot. We're in decision time. Sometimes they say, I'm probably 6 months out. Sometimes they get sticker shock and they say, boy, I've got to get financing in place. And then sometimes they tell you right away, you're going to get this job and it's yours. I just need to get the contract written. So we believe in classifying our pipeline as contracts to be signed, hots, which are things that are in negotiation, warms, something that's 6 months out, or active, which is something that's a year out. Now, a closing ratio, there's all kinds of ways to spin a closing ratio. And until you start doing it like this, and I think this is the absolute best way to do a closing ratio, you take the number of decisions. Like over the last year, and the way this program works is every day, one day drops off and a new day is added. So over the last year, $68 million worth of decisions were made. 1,585 proposals, a decision were made on. Now, we have 46% of our proposals that are made from the dollar standpoint, we close. So we're closing 46% of our proposals. We're closing 73% of the people that we touch. So 7 out of 10 people that we touch, we close. Now, this has a lot to do with, we have a big service business, and a lot of those are one-call closes. So we close a lot of those by just being really efficient because somebody usually has a leak. But I can tell you right now, 46% of my work to the dollar closes, and I can go over here to my hots, and I know that in the next 90 days, because that's what our selling cycle is for most of our work, is a 90-day period. We're doing primarily commercial work. 46% of that 26 million is going to close in the next 90 days. It's happened consistently for me over the last 5 years since I've been, disciplined in following this system. So if you want to know what the future is, know what your closing ratio is, know how many projects you have in decision mode, like we have 441 bids that are going to have decisions made. We're going to get 46% of that 26 million. And then we also have contracts to be signed. These are projects that our salespeople, have been told you're going to get that, and we always say you would bet your paycheck on it. And if I wanted to know what that, what that consisted of, I can drill into this and I can see I've got 17 projects and what the, which projects there are, and what the base bid was, who the estimator was, who the account manager was, who the takeoff person was. And then if I wanted to go into detail, I can look at this, drill into it, and gives me all the job information. We talked about pre-qualification. This tool, one of the things I love about it is it helps pre-qualify our clients. And we've got 5 primary pre-qualification issues: relate and connect, rules of engagement, finding the problem, money step. There's little drop downs here that gives you, conversation things like, if you're going to relate and connect, let's talk on a first name basis, talk about family, recreation, discuss the weather, just kind of get things on the, get some conversation going. So this is a really, really neat tool. Let me go back to the pipeline homepage here. Okay, now we talk about goal setting. We believe that there's, 3 primary goal settings that we do as a company. Putting bids on the street. We have a goal of trying to get 13 million bids, $13 million worth of bids on the street each month. And you can see in January we fell a little bit short. In February we were a little bit above. We almost hit it here in March. Looks like April's going to be a really good month. But we know this. If we're not getting bids on the street, we don't have a possibility of securing work. And here's what I also know. When I have months that I have low bidding, 90 days from now, I'm going to have low closings because that's our selling cycle. And, if you're not putting work on the street, you don't have a chance of achieving, success. Then we like to measure, how many contracts we secure, dollars in contracts we secure versus our goal. Like our goal is to close 4.4 million a month. And then we measure that. Like we're, we had a really good January. February is a little bit disappointing. March, we fell a little bit short of goal. April, when I look up here at my contracts to be signed, it looks like we're going to blow that out of the water. So, I'm really confident that we're going to, revenue and sales are going to continue to do well. We talked a lot about measuring behaviors. This is the one tool, the only sales automation tool that I know of that measures behaviors. Behaviors are things like how many meetings have you attended, how many calls have you made. This system, it does that by just checking a box and it totals it up. We're falling a little short of the behaviors that we had goal set, but things are falling in line, and we use this as a management tool when somebody falls short. The next thing I want to show you is the dashboard. Everybody has a dashboard, and the dashboard helps set priorities. We're going to go into one of my service sales guys here. Let's talk about Casey. Casey's a relatively new guy that's working with us. He was actually a bartender that had a great personality. We profiled him. He wanted to get into the roofing business. We brought him in. He spent about 90 days in training, and now he's selling service for us. But every day Casey comes in, and Casey looks at his dashboard, and right here is his next follow-up contacts. Now, Casey does a lot of transactions, and we can see he was supposed to follow up on the 17th and the 18th. Here we are on the 19th. So Casey's been out in the field a lot. He's got a lot of following up to do. I got to get in and speak with Casey because he's fallen a little bit behind in his follow-ups. Now, you can see over here on the left-hand side, if it's red, it means it's due. If it's green, it's not due. So I can tell right now Casey is behind. And after I get done with this presentation, I'm going to walk down to Casey and I'm going to show him his dashboard, and I'm going to ask him, how you doing on your follow-ups? Because you've made some commitments, obviously, that you haven't. This also, meetings, takeoffs, revised takeoffs, when an estimate is due, all of the things all the behaviors that Casey's supposed to be doing, everything is on his dashboard. Um, I took you into file data. File data is this is when the lead comes in, it gets logged in, all the job information. We do the pre-qualification. Once the project is bid, there's a base bid, what the contract amount came in at, what's your gross margin, how many labor hours, who worked on this, who was the estimator, who was the account manager. Here's all the sales behaviors when they're due. All of this goes on the dashboard. Another thing I love about this is it does all the analytics here. You can do a lead recap, captured contract report. I can do graphs over here that just show, how are we doing on contracts, proposals. You can slice and dice this information really out of the box any way you want. Another nice component is the report card component. This helps me know, okay, like for right now for this month, we've done 159 estimates, we've put 158 proposals, we've secured 69 contracts. If I wanted to know the specifics, I could expand this, and this tells me all of the estimates, and if I wanted to drill down into one of them, I can do that. So it just makes the information really easily accessible. I can look at it by company. Let's go ahead and take a look at old Casey and see what he's been doing. Oops, Casey. Okay, Casey has gotten 18 estimates done, 17 proposals. He's secured 12 contracts already, totaling about $48,000 worth of work. Casey works in our service department. But what this does is it's a phenomenal tool to help our salespeople stay organized. And it also helps management understand just kind of how organized somebody is. And I'm a real believer that organization leads to success. So that's a quick overview of the tool that we use, FollowUp, and how I use it, and our sales managers use it, and how our people use it. If you want more information on that, you can contact the guys at FollowUp. Ryan and Eric, I would recommend. So let me just kind of recap everything. I really believe that you got to define your sales process, define who's going to be wearing what hats, and how, just how you're going to do business. Remember what Bobby Bowden says, it's 80%, putting the right people in the field. You got to have the right, people on your team working for you. And, I really believe in using behavior assessment tools to help you with that. You got to provide leadership. Don't be a supervisor. Catch people doing things right. And it'll be awesome, and your people will respond to that. And then hold your team accountable. Have them set their own goals, and then just hold them accountable to setting goals.
Well, Greg, thanks. Feels like you're drinking from a fire hose. There's a lifetime worth of principles and lessons there that we can learn from to grow our business. What I'd like to talk about now is just next steps. You saw how Gregg used FollowUp Power to help grow his revenue and his sales. So if you were interested in checking out FollowUp Power, you will see a button below this video telling you to schedule a time with me. That gives you access to my calendar, and then we can dive deep into your business to see how FollowUp Power can work for you. Thank you so much for attending this webinar today, and we look forward to future conversations together.